please help me welcome with a clap or a wave or any reaction you would like to have to the chairperson of PMI Southern Africa, Mr. Tundo Ojearamakudu. Tunde, over to you. Welcome to the summit.
No, thank you very much, Louis. And good morning to you all. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be in the world. You're welcome to our 5th annual summit from South Africa. And just to get started, this happens to be our 2nd virtual one. And the next, we hope to have it as a hybrid. So you're all welcome. The theme of today's summit is AI and the future of project management practices. So what is it about AI and project management? Research informs us that at least 80% of project management related interventions like data collection and predictive analysis in the next 7 to 8 years will be carried out by AI in an unprecedented and efficient manner. In a recent study by PMI, over 80% of respondents indicated that organizations are seeing an impact from AI. And over the next 3 years, project professionals expect the proportion of projects they manage using AI to jump from 23 to 27%. This is according to PMI's AI Innovators Cracking the Code on Project Management. And so, but what does it mean for you and I as project managers? And what kind of future lies ahead for project management practices? And how do we navigate and position ourselves of the impact this will have for successful execution of our endeavors? It's accurately known that AI has taken over the more traditional settings, including administration, as we used to know them. This includes project management roles. But is this the future or just the start of it? Now, one clear advantage AI gives us is more efficient outputs. Now, in our discourse today, we will tease out existing interventions and hope to take away new nuances to our different worlds. The position experts take is project managers will continue to steer projects through difficult decisions and unexpected obstacles using AI for guidance and insights based on data. In another recent PMI webinar on AI advances and ethics, Mohammed Hassan said that the real value of AI is the algorithms that support decision-making. So what interventions really already exist for us? What challenges are we faced with now and in the future in managing our projects? What trends exist? What patterns are we seeing really? And what structure underlines all this for decision makers? Today, we expect insights and examples from subject matter experts, technical experts who will showcase what is driving this change. Another reflection point is, what lessons shall we take away from all this? And how relevant are we? Believe me, we remain the center of it all. Our lineup of esteemed speakers will be led by Dr. Marius Oosthuizen, and the others in no particular order are Sheila Tomko, Harald Fleischmann, Johan Stein, Mohammed Babul, Marcus Glowers, and our panelists will include Dr. Linkeys at the end of the session. I will definitely not want to steal the storm, so I will give the floor to speak for themselves. So you can expect an exciting experience, packed with interesting and diverse bouquet of topics and conversations that keep us stimulated throughout. Now, as I'm rounding up, without much ado, allow me to introduce to you our MC for today, perhaps known to a few of you as Bev. Bev has been our anchor of our summit in the last while. Just to give you a bit of background, Bev Hancock is a conversational catalyst who believes that we lead through the words that we speak. Our belief is that we hold some magic and wisdom in our language and in the practice of Ubuntu. So she will guide us through today's proceedings. Bev's mantra is leading through conversation. So we could not have any other better. Therefore, I'll be giving you the Bev Hancock. But before I do that, I'd like to just thank our sponsors, especially our gold sponsor, Exaro. And there, you just fly the video and then we'll have Bev. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Tunde. It's absolutely wonderful to be here again today. It's been an absolutely amazing journey to spend. This is my 4th PMI summit that I've done. And I think everyone just goes from strength to strength. And one of the reasons why the PMI Summit is the highlight of my speaking year, is that we have a conversation. So our invitation for you today is not to just sit and listen. We're going to ask you not to multitask, but we are going to ask you to have your phones at the ready. Why? Because we really want to have your voice as part of the conversation. So I am going to ask Louis to put up our Mentimeter instructions so that I can really connect us together so we can have your voice coming in. We've got a number of different channels that we can use. I see the chat stream is great. Please keep your voice in the chat. Let us hear us what you think. But today we're going to be connected by an interactive technology called Mentimeter. You will see it up on your screen. I've also put a link in the chat. If you'd like to go straight there, you can click on that link. On your phones, if you can either scan in the QR code or go to your browser and go to www.menti.com and you will see the code there. It is 58517301. The great thing about this is the responses are completely anonymous, so you can say whatever you feel, obviously with the politeness and respect that we've all come to know as part of the general conversation. So I'm going to ask you to pop on there right now, and we have a question that we want to just get started so that we can see if everybody is in the room. So if we can go to our first question, that would be great. Louis, you can flash up the code from time to time if we need it, but it is in the chat. Louis, no, the one before that, that's great, thank you. The first question we're going to be asking, and all I want from you is just one word or a very short phrase. That's all you've got space for. If I had a robot, what is the first job that I would give it to do? What's the very first job? What is the one thing that I don't want to do that I would give the robot to do? You will see at the bottom right of your screen there that you can see that we've already got people starting to come in, and we are already looking at 14 responses. And I'm going to ask as many voices in the room. We've got 108 participants in the room. So let's answer as quickly as we possibly can. Remember, like the virtual world has taught us, we're always on a time schedule. So put your answer in, press submit, and let's see what comes into the room. I'm going to give you a moment to do that as we can. As Tunde did say, we have got the most fabulous group of speakers lined up for us from all over the world. The one thing the virtual environment has done for us is it has allowed us to go global. And we not only have speakers, but we have delegates in the room from all over the world. And isn't this the most wonderful way of us being able to have a global conversation, to take our project management conversation higher and higher and higher, to collaborate, to co-create. We've already got over 50 in the room so far. Louis, I'm going to ask you to take away the picture while people are still busy putting in their responses. But let's see, just generally, what is the general feeling in the room? All right, I can see a couple of things that are coming out there that are really, really nice. And the top three that are coming out, certainly, if I could have a robot to do all of the housework, I would be the happiest woman in the world. And coffee, tea, yes, having that robot, just putting that hot cup of coffee, beautifully brewed, preferably from with a cappuccino, if it's up to me, to do that shopping. Can we see that what's coming out of these responses? These are the things that we need to be handing over to AI. AI is not about replacing people. AI is about allowing us to be more human, about us to being able to really give of our absolute best while technology does the stuff that we really, really don't want to do. I can see a couple of comments in the chat coming in saying, also do my driving for me. I mean, we've even got that with driverless cars coming in. Wouldn't that be absolutely amazing? So as I see, we have over 80 people in the room. For the extra 20 who are not yet in the room, please make sure that you connect so that your voice will be heard, because our keynote speaker will be asking you a whole lot of wonderful questions. So now that we're connected, it is my great pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker, who I am so excited to hear about. We know that AI is a hot topic at the moment, and the question that everyone is asking is, what does it mean for the future of business and society? And in our case, what does it mean for project management? And here to help us answer that question is Dr. Marius Oosthuizen, whose passion it is to help leaders across the globe develop strategic foresight and ethical implementation as we explore the relationship between man and machine. Marius holds a PhD in integrative public leadership, an MA in strategic foresight, an MPhil in social and political ethics, as well as an undergraduate degree in systemic theology. And he contributes to a number of global think tanks with business leaders, policymakers, to create future-orientated strategy. Remember to keep your Mentimeter handy, because he is going to be asking you questions. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Marius Oosthuizen to the stage. Marius, take it away.
Thank you very much, Bev, and it's great to be with the PMI today. Lovely to see some smiling faces from all over South Africa and even around the world. I am going to move quite quickly. We've got a lot to get through in the minutes we have together, and I am going to be asking you 3 times during this time to interact with me on Menti. And so, as Bev said, please keep your cell phone ready to do that. The topic of my talk here this morning is, how will artificial intelligence transform the future of business and society? And so, as someone who thinks about these things as a futurist, I want to take the conversation to another level, right? To ask some of the big, challenging questions around some of these things. And where better to start with that than with the really the founder of the notion of artificial intelligence, a guy called Alan Turing. Alan Turing is an academic. He lived around the 1950s in the United States, and he's very famous for being the first academic to ask this question: can machines think? So what would happen in a world where machines can think? And Alan Turing was very interested in this idea. And he started asking this idea from the 1950s. Now, if you think back to the 1950s, this was the time where in the American dream, American families were buying cars. They started to buy household appliances. And so at a human societal level, we started to be surrounded by all kinds of machines. And so Alan Turing was challenging this idea and saying, what would happen if these machines woke up and started thinking? Now, I'm going to suggest to you that Alan Turing, as important as he was asking a question that was actually too small. We have to get to a more important answer, a more valuable answer, we have to ask a much, much bigger question. And so we're going to explore what could this bigger question be that maybe Alan Turing wasn't thinking about. And so to start off on that, let me say that the paradigm or the mindset around AI that's dominating the conversation around the world is a little bit like this picture here, where we see humans interacting with machines, and we start to see that the machines look a little bit like us. They do things that are quite similar to us. They start to think like us. They start to talk like us. They start to even have, if you put these machines inside of robots, they start to have bodies that look and feel a little bit like ours. And so the conversation about AI is really centered on a conversation that is something along the lines of meet the new species. There's new species emerging on the planet. It's going to be artificial intelligence. And as we saw in your comments earlier, maybe the AI will make us coffee. Maybe the AI, like a good neighbor, right, that brings you something to eat when they move in next door. Maybe the AI can do my admin. Like, this is the conversation that we're having about AI. Now, I think that's probably true. There's some aspects of that that's likely to happen. But I think there's a much bigger question we need to ask ourselves about AI. We're going to get into that question. So in the current conversation, it goes a little bit like this. It starts off with where we are today, which is about artificial with narrow intelligence, which is, it is intelligent, but it's less than human intelligence. You phone the insurance firm and you speak to a chatbot, and the chatbot recognizes your cell phone number. And so it says, good day, Dr. Oosthuizen, how can I assist you? And you say, I would like to check my bank balance. And the AI is clever enough to know that you have a bank balance. But if you say to the AI, the same chatbot, I'd like to check the weather, they couldn't answer you. Maybe Siri inside your phone can answer you, but she can only tell you what she finds on the internet. So if I say to Siri, what's the GDP of the United States? She'll go and search the internet and she'll tell me. But if I say to Siri, what's the meaning of life? She doesn't really have an answer to that. So this brings us to that second level of what we call artificial general intelligence, where the potential is that artificial intelligence becomes similar to human intelligence, that maybe you don't have an answer for this question, what's the meaning of life? But at least you can think about the question, you can discuss the question, you can reflect about the question. And then there's this view that maybe by 2060, we get to a stage where the artificial intelligence becomes a super intelligence. It's far greater than human intelligence. And then the fear happens, which is, are we all going to be working for the machines? Now, that's the way the conversation is shaped at the moment. And I want to ask you questions in the Menti. So I'm going to ask our project leader to take us to the Menti meter. And in the Menti, I'm going to ask you a question about how you see these applications of AI happening, what you think the effects of that will be for society. And so in a second there, you'll see the Menti meter come up. And really there are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions. Each of them you can choose, is this going to take less than 20 years? Or is it going to take more than 20 years? So the first question, artificial superintelligence is 20 years away. Do you agree it's 20 years or less? Or do you agree, no, this is 50 years, 60 years, 70 years away? The second one, the impact on human life from this kind of intelligence will be mostly positive with some destructive elements, which means, yes, I agree with it on the left, or no, I don't agree that much on the right. Or you say the impact on human life will be destructive with some positive elements. You might go all the way to the right-hand side and say, oh, I'm really scared about this. I'm really worried about this. The second last question there, the adoption curve will be fastest in the public sector on the left, controlled by government services. Do you agree on the right-hand side? Or do you think the adoption curve will be fastest in the private sector? Now, very interesting, as we wait for that to emerge, depending on where you go in the world, the speed of adoption of this kind of intelligence is very different. So in China, because it's an authoritarian one-party state, China is able to bring that technology to the market, putting cameras in the street, artificial intelligence, policing, accelerate that very quickly. We're seeing something similar in London, but we don't see this across the United Kingdom because as a democracy, they can only use it in a very limited sense within what the law allows in London, the bylaws controlling the city, but it's really going to be up to the private sector in the case of London to bring that technology to the market at any kind of scale. Now, I want to go back to our slides for a second and talk a little bit more about whether this is the right way to think about artificial intelligence. When we look at what is being done around the world with artificial intelligence, we might observe that it is currently being done with what we call an anthropocentric design. In other words, we are designing AI to be like us. We are the Anthropocene. We are the human beings, right? And so there's this anthropocentric design, which says, can we use machine learning, neural language processing, vision and speech and planning and robotics to create something like ourselves? So if you think back to religion, which has this view that there's a God who creates humans in his image, we're basically playing God with artificial intelligence. We're developing deep learning, content extraction, classification, speech to text. And what this is allowing us to do, if you look at the right-hand side, is we are starting to see neural networks developing the ability for vision. So you show an artificial intelligence a picture of a cat, it will say, it will process that image, it'll say this is a cat. You show it a dog, it'll say it's not a cat. So it needs a new category. So now it can see it's a cat, it's a dog. If you give that artificial intelligence a speech, it can analyze the audio sounds. Now, when you put that neural network visioning and neural network hearing together, you start to create an artificial intelligence that can make Barack Obama say all kinds of things that he would never say. You start to create lip-synced puppetry using artificial intelligence. So it's very likely in the next 5 years, you're going to watch a movie, you're going to see Sean Penn acting in the movie, but it wasn't Sean Penn. It was the AI Sean Penn that pays a royalty to Sean for his face and his voice and uses the body of Brad Pitt and the smile of whatever, right? So artificial intelligence is developing through computing power, judgment, and intuition, but it is an anthropocentric form. It's a human-based form of artificial intelligence. Now, what does that mean? It means that we are evolving, but we're developing what I call the monkey mind, which is the sort of primitive, emotional, fight or flight type of artificial intelligence. Microsoft developed this AI called Tay. It put the AI bot on the internet and it allowed it to learn from the conversations of people on Twitter. Within 24 hours, Tay spoke like an angry, confused, racist, misogynist. Microsoft had to switch off the AI to avoid the reputational damage of their AI being a racist, misogynist. Why is that? Because as we build artificial intelligence that mimics our capabilities, it also mimics our shortcomings as a human species. And so what we need in the world of AI is a shift from this kind of anthropocentric thinking, which is on the left-hand side, which puts human beings at the top of the pile. We are the center of the universe. The world revolves around us. The ecology revolves around us. The planetary system revolves around us. And we're starting to create artificial intelligence that looks a little bit like us. And that's the conversation that most people are having when they think about AI. We need to move to a different kind of conversation, which is an ecosystem-based conversation about AI that happens within the planetary boundaries of what the Earth can handle. One of the negative sides of human progress is we're a little bit like, as a species, we're a bit like someone who rents an apartment, then trashes it, don't wash the dishes, don't make the bed, leave the papers on the floor, and then we give up the rental apartment and we look for another rental apartment called Mars because of the way the monkey mind in the human condition tends to assert itself. And so we need to move to a different conversation about AI, and that is in fact, what I think is more likely to happen, which I'm going to show you in a second. Now, how do we think differently about the implications of artificial intelligence? To do that, we can borrow a little bit from a thinker called Herbert Spencer, who created this theory that he called social Darwinism. The theory is basically that society will evolve on the basis of natural selection of the best capabilities in society. So if you go to London and you go to the financial district in London, you'll see a skyscraper with a corporation with a man in a suit selling you a banking service. If you go to Sandton, you'll see a skyscraper with a man in a suit selling you a banking service. Why do we create similar phenomena in London and Shanghai and Hong Kong and Johannesburg and New York? Because society will develop on the basis of natural selection. And the more complex society becomes, the more we develop on the basis of natural selection. Not at the personal level, at the societal, at the network level. And this is what is happening to human society. And it's into that society that artificial intelligence is coming. And it's coming very quickly. But it's not coming in the form of a robot who makes your coffee. You might have a robot who makes your coffee, that's fine. But it's coming in the form of robots that do virtual education, augmented reality, entertainment, transport systems that are automated, agricultural systems with precision farming and automation, financial services based on an algorithm that knows you need a student loan in 5 years before you even know that you want to study in 5 years. Because the algorithm has analyzed your personal data and understands your desires, your hopes, your aspirations, your dreams. Science, health, marketing, government services, financial services, as well in the area of criminal justice and in war and conflict. We're starting to see there's a bomb being used in Ukraine called the loitering munition. It's a small drone with an artificial intelligence brain that gets sent off into the sky, flies around the eastern Ukraine until it sees something that it knows to be a Russian tank, and then it kills it. And so if it flies around and it doesn't find a Russian tank in time and the battery dies, it crashes down there because it's a cheap disposable drone. It's an artificial intelligence munition called the loitering munition. Now, what is going to happen is this is going to proliferate in society, and it's going to create what I call the eco-intelligence of the hive mind. Human intelligence is not actually as impressive as we think. Every single human's intelligence will die between 80 years and 120 years. So how is it that society can become so intelligent? It's not humans. It's the network effect of humans. It's the hive mind. It's the eco-intelligence of human beings. Now, I want to take you to a second Menti question for a second, where we want to test a little bit your sense of how quickly is this network intelligence going to happen? How quickly is this network intelligence going to proliferate across our society? I've asked you there to rate the impact and the speed of adoption of AI in different sectors. So in other words, in transport and agriculture and financial services and marketing, how quickly do you think it's going to proliferate? And how big is the impact likely to be? So if it's in the top right-hand corner, it's coming very quickly and the impact is going to be massive. If it's in the bottom left corner, it's coming quite slowly and the impact might not be that much. Now, I want to observe very quickly, it's quite interesting, your sense there that government services is going to happen slowly and probably have a fairly low impact. I would beg to differ. If you live in a country like China, you climb off the airplane in Beijing, by using facial recognition, government knows who you are. They also have access to the back end of your cell phone's payment apps, which means if you cross the street illegally in Beijing, they can fine you on the basis of an AI and take the money from your bank account without any human being even speaking to you. Last year in London, they arrested a gentleman for committing a crime because the police services AI engine had issued a warrant for his arrest on the basis of dangerous public behavior. And so it might be that government happens much more quickly and has a much greater impact. Now, of course, in South Africa, in Kenya, in Nigeria, in Central African Republic, the adoption speeds of these things would be quite different. I would agree with you, conflict and war, cyber conflict, all these things are a real challenge. Now, I want to go back to my slides for a second to think about what are the implications of this as we think about what this is going to mean for us. So I said at the start that my sense was that Turing was asking the wrong question. He was asking, can machines think? We need to ask a much bigger question. We need to ask the question, what form will a post-human society look like? In the next 20, 30 years, when this artificial intelligence, through ubiquitous networks, embedded electronics, immersive interfaces, through things like sensors in cars and bottles and houses and buildings, through things like 5G networks, through things like multi-user interfaces, when this proliferates in the society around us, And society is no longer organized, like Herbert Spencer said, on the basis of societal evolution, natural selection by humans. What happens when you get to London and there isn't a skyscraper with a man in a suit selling you banking services, but you get to some server that is virtual, where an artificial intelligence who doesn't need to wear a suit is offering you banking services and insurance services and education services? What world are we in when we live in a post-human society where the technology is the organizing principle of society? Now, policymakers and entrepreneurs are going to be challenged to deal with this in a number of ways, and I'm almost concluding here for a bit of Q&A with you. Policymakers and entrepreneurs need to think about the following things. What about eco-intelligent innovation systems to harness this hive mind? What is project management in a hive mind environment? What about the issues of unequal access, inclusion, and job transformation? What does it mean to work with an AI, work for an AI, work as an AI? What about value conflicts like fairness or meaning? What is the meaningfulness if you don't buy a car because you love the car, but you drive in a car that's driven by an AI? Where do we derive meaning from as human beings? What about trust deficits when the government's AI is making the decision in the court or the police service or in the education curriculum? What about safety, security, and calamity? Stuff goes wrong. What about if one of these AIs go wrong? We have to ask these tough questions. And then maybe, just maybe, if we're clever and brave and innovative, we can enter an abundant society where we create much more food, much more water, much more energy, much more education than we need. And we're into a very different economic, political, and social system. I have one more mentee to ask you, and this is just to jog our imagination into what could the future look like. And so my question to you is this: where are you in this eco-intelligent hive mind in 2050? If you cast your mind ahead to your children growing up, are you on the bottom of the adoption curve where you are what I call a chatbot surfer, where you are accessing AI through your cell phone, surfing the internet using a smart device? Or do you move up the adoption curve where you're a digital nomad? You spend 50% of your time inside virtual reality in the metaverse with the AIs, and 50% of your time in the bushveld or in the Kruger National Park in the real world. Or are you further up the adoption curve? Maybe you're in a blended family, a blended AI family where you're married to or raising an AI person in the home. Think about that one for a second. There is a Chinese gentleman who's married an artificial intelligence robot. He's legally gotten the permission. He's married an AI robot. That's a whole nother conversation. Or are you way up there on the other end of the adoption curve as a project manager where you're a transhumanist, where you've enhanced your human capacity by becoming a humanoid connected to the hive mind through a neural link? And just to shock you, if you thought that this is sci-fi, Wi-Fi was sci-fi 5 years ago. Now it's everywhere. Elon Musk has demonstrated a neural link, a brain shunt in a pig that can monitor the brain activity of the pig and then stimulate the brain activity of the pig to make it do the things that he wants to do. Now, I'm not suggesting that we're pigs. I'm suggesting that we have choices to make. And depending on the choices we make, we are going to create this hive mind, this eco-intelligence. The choice we have is where do we feature, what's the role we play, and what are our choices along the way. Colleagues, it's been wonderful talking to you. I'm going to stop there. I'd love to take some questions and inputs. I'm sure you've got some responses.
Wow, Marius, thank you so much. And to put that amount of value into such a short space of time, thank you so much. Just to remind everybody that you can ask questions in the chat. You will also notice on your Mentimeter, there's a Q&A button, which will send questions directly to me. Any of the speakers at any time, you can pop a question on there, and I will certainly be keeping an eye on that. So Marius, I think perhaps one of the questions that really comes to mind is, I think through the pandemic, the one phrase that has been coming up is do your own research. All right. And the idea of do your own research often means go and find people who agree with you. as we go into AI, how do we as project managers really develop the critical thinking skills that we need to be able to make sure that we're not allowing AI to control us rather than the other way around?
So, Bev, that's such a great question. And in fact, what you're describing as this idea of do your own research, meaning that you talk to the people that agree with you, actually, we're already in an environment where the AI is controlling what we think. The way that is happening is we are all connected to social media. The information distribution system of our world, we used to call it the press. The press meant a human being goes to a story, writes the story, asks the person, interviews the person, writes the story, publishes the story, and anybody can pick up the newspaper and read it, leave it on a park bench, and randomly someone can find that newspaper and read it and form an opinion. The world doesn't work like that anymore. We receive the information we receive on the basis of an algorithm that first looks at who we are, where we live. One of my big frustrations is I hate Google News now. I used to love Google News, but now I can't stand it because when I open it, it wants to tell me about Zwelinzima Vavi and Fakile and Ryk Neetling and all the little tiny South African stories that are not actually shaping the future of the world. But the artificial intelligence thinks that because I live in South Africa, I'm interested in Fakile Mbalula's tweet about his shoes that he bought in the Ukraine that he never traveled to. And so what we need to do as human beings is we need to go back to a place of what we call critical thinking. We have to develop a healthy type of distrust of the information that's being presented to us. And so what happens is inside of an organization like a business or in a political party or in a community, a dominant narrative develops about what's going on in the world. And when you start understanding the profound power of this artificial intelligence, you start realizing that that dominant narrative is being decided by a very small group of people who have their own particular biases. And I'll make one example. I was in a conference at Harvard Business School on the ethics of AI, and they were talking about racism in artificial intelligence. And one of the examples they gave, a case study, was a small group of white young programmers in Silicon Valley who programmed an AI for facial recognition. But all the photos they used to train the AI were of white people. Now, you might say that's absurd, that's racist. It is racist. But where does that come from? If the person is creating the AI after their own image, they're not going to take a photo of an Indian person, a Pakistani person, a Bangladeshi person, an Australian person, and create an AI with a broad intelligence. They're going to create an AI with a narrow intelligence. And so we have to have a healthy dose of critical thinking and curiosity and, dare I say, a little bit of suspicion. I'm not suggesting conspiracy theory suspicion, because that's a whole nother conversation, but a healthy dose of suspicion to navigate this brave new world of artificial intelligence.
Absolutely. And I think it goes to one of the questions. We got a lovely question from Henk in the chat as well, but I'll come back to that now. One of the questions that's come through is, how do we control the danger of AI bias? For example, in the US, there was an example of an AI system that passed sentences on guilty parties, and it was found to have a bias against people of color. And that speaks to exactly what you were talking about now. And bias, and maybe it goes back to the algorithm, is that, are we actually programming bias into algorithm? And this is going to come up a lot later in this discussion as well. But maybe just a brief thought on that, because I do have a couple more questions.
So I think that the solution to that at one level is very sophisticated, which means that we've got to have individuals who want to fix that problem, engaging in the complexity of the world where this kind of stuff is built. In the AI programming process, there needs to be ethicists, philosophers, theorists who can think about these, sociologists. But at a fundamental level, it's actually not that difficult, because it's the same principles that we use for good governance generally. You need transparency, you need openness, you need accountability, and you need independence. Those are the four things in any system, in a business. If you have transparency and openness and accountability and independent third parties involved in the system, it's a little bit like a river that becomes a swamp and then the water gets stagnant, versus a river that's flowing, that's open, that's healthy. It's the openness and it's the transparency that creates the healthy critique. And so within AI, we would need to build the same kind of mechanisms.
Great, thank you. Heng says, what is there a difference that you have seen between AI adoption in South Africa and in the rest of the world? Are we on track? Are we behind? Where are we sitting at the moment?
So it's a great question, and we could ask the same question about emerging markets globally, the global south, etc. South Africa is an interesting case because we have a world-class connected economy that's an open economy, especially in the services sector. So it's very interesting. Our banking sector and the related services, insurance and so on, is adopting AI at exactly the same rate as the best in the world. And in some instances, they're ahead of the curve. So you look at a company like Pineapple Insurance. You go on your phone, you do a quick insurance check on insuring a laptop with its serial number. It'll do an artificial intelligence risk analysis and offer you a product with a price, built by Sanlam, in business with a fintech startup. So that's the one end of the spectrum. But if you look at our education system, our public sector, you look at society more generally, we have a lag effect where in some sectors of society, we're way behind on AI. Without being too brutal, when our Minister of Communications think that communications is wearing a shirt that's branded Minister of Communications or Fourth Industrial Revolution, it's not about the T-shirt. It's about the deep capabilities that we need to build. And in some areas, we are still quite far behind.
Wonderful, thank you. Greg Zaccarini, I see you had your hand up. Did you have a question?
Yes, sorry, I was busy typing it out. So, I mean, this is a pet subject, Marius, of mine. So I've been following it for many years, and I've been very much involved in large BPM programs and projects, and involved in automation of workflow and in people, etc. So it does touch on my technology side as well. But I unfortunately take a very dystopian view of the future of AI, as many people do. And I think the threats are even where we see now the use of AI writing its own code and humans not even understanding what they're writing at that level. And that's not even getting to the level of AGI, artificial general intelligence, at our level of intelligence. And we assume that at AGI level that just taking a step back, Turing's test to get out the box in terms of that has already been achieved, I think in 2017. And Marius, you didn't cover that, but I mean, that was profound, that a computer was able to talk to its handlers and let it get onto the World Wide Web, onto the WAN.
Rick, that's a fabulous point. I am going to ask you to, if we can maybe ask Marius to respond to that. We can keep it short and sweet. We can believe me, this is a subject we could be here all day. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you, Bev. Greg, let me say that as a futurist, we use a concept called negativity bias, which is a positive thing in some ways, that human beings are structured because of fight and flight to protect ourselves. And so we tend to see the world first from the point of view of the threat. And this is when you do analysis of foresight of different fields, including AI, you come up against this thing of negativity bias. I personally would guard against the two extremes of negativity bias versus techno-optimism, which is where the two camps are. My own view is we're somewhere in the middle, that there are these fundamental systemic threats from AI, but there are also fundamental systemic opportunities from AI. The one thing I'll say to make it very practical, I have 3 children. They also write their own code. It's called being naughty, but I make the rules because it's my house, right? And so as human beings, the challenge we have is how do we grow these little monsters that can be incredible and talented and lovely and amazing and take pictures with us and celebrate their existence, but how do we make sure that we control the house? It's our rules, it's our planet, it's our home, it's our society. We control the social contract. And as we outsource the coffee making and the love making and what other forms of making that we want to do to these artificial intelligences, we have to reflect back about what are the rules of the game and who's going to control those rules. Just to end by saying that, someone like Elon Musk says the only way to beat the AI is to become them, is to join them. If you can't beat them, join them. Get a brain shunt and join them. I'm not so sure. I think that there is a set of fundamental human values that needs to create an envelope within which we use weapons like nuclear weapons, economic growth with industrialization, and of course, AI as well. Thank you for letting me share with you. It's been a fun ride. I want to wish you well for the rest of the conference, and hopefully you got some food for thought. Thank you, Bev.
Marius, you've been an absolute star. Thank you very much. And people, please keep those questions rolling. We will try and get to them, if not now during the panel, or if not in the panel, certainly afterwards. But your questions are coming through. They're absolutely wonderful. It's now time to move on to our next speaker. And I would like to welcome to the stage Shayla Tomko. And I think the question that we all are here to answer is, what does AI mean in very real terms for the project manager? Shayla is here to share practical insights of how we can use digital tools to maximum advantage. As a successful PMO lead in the mining industry, she has firsthand experience in the importance of culture, innovation, and adaptability to take your project from strategic vision to practical implementation. She believes that although we reap the rewards and values of what we achieve as a team at the end of delivery, it is truly the road of intertwined processes and operations that drives her passion for what she does, no matter what the challenge. Sheila, over to you. Shayla, beg your pardon, Shayla.
Thank you very much, Bev. I think you guys can hear me now, loud and clear. Thank you, everyone, for giving me this opportunity to share our journey. I will talk to what I feel is the long road to the plug and play PMO. All right, I just want to make sure we've got our screen going here. Perfect. All right. Thank you very much, guys. Welcome again. And just to Bev, as she spoke a bit to the background that I come from. So I'm PMO lead and project portfolio manager for a manufacturing firm. And we build custom products for the mining sector. So these are very big products that we handle, very big pieces of material, lots of intertwined processes. And really, I am actually here just to tell you guys that the robots have taken over and we didn't stand a chance, and would be probably a very interesting start to this conversation, but that's not really what happened with our journey. I can tell you guys that the robots are far from taking over, and that there's a long road in code that has to happen before that happens for us. So why I am here is I'd like to share some of the story of our digital transformation that we went through. And subsequent to that, it was actually an accidental digital transformation. We didn't know we were on that path. We didn't intend it initially. It wasn't driven by this strategy that was thought out. And this accidental transformation started with a business operation that was now struggling. We were now a business process, and our business reached a point where we were delivering projects not on time. The risks were enormous. We were underquoting. We had many failures across departments where we needed to understand frustrations to move from one point to the next. And we couldn't get to that because everything was so decentralized at that point. We were at crossroads at some point where we had to decide, well, do we keep our manufacturing facility live, or do we source everything out? You know, our portfolio can very quickly grow from 2 projects to 20 projects, so locally, internationally. So we really had to sit back and understand, well, what does this mean for us? You know, we have this opportunity that we need to now make work. And we took a step back. We knew that our brand was taking a knock as well, and that really played a massive role in sort of, we needed change, okay? And where our journey accidentally started was through a process called lean manufacturing. Now, lean manufacturing didn't really speak to automation right off the bat for us. That was far from our thinking. What we wanted to do is just get our processes better in our workshop, and hopefully that would translate into project success, you know, very oversimplified at that time. What spoke to us, though, with regards to lean manufacturing, were the lean manufacturing principles. Now, specifically, lean manufacturing is all about maximizing production and minimizing waste. Now, in a physical workshop, you can see where someone is standing and waiting for something to turn, and you can account for that. But waste in technology also exists. And we had to take a step back and go, wait a second, there is a bigger picture here that we haven't understood. We can't just ask for change at this point in the chain when actually we have nothing built around it. So some things weren't making sense at that point. And just that minimizing waste, if you guys are waiting for your computer to start up for 10 minutes, that is bad news for you, because you're going to struggle to keep up with the technology that's happening, with all the algorithms that are coming into play. So looking at our lean manufacturing and lean principles, we had two at that point in time that really spoke to us and allowed us to correlate it a little bit with our digital transformation. And those two were, just want to pass here, guys. Apologies, guys, just seems like it was a bit frozen. We moved on to the flow and establishing pull. Okay, so those two specific principles were key to us. Because if we could establish where things were coming from and going to, we could understand where we needed to build certain apps to then speak to the right stakeholders at the right time without or minimizing, per se, human interaction. Okay. At this point in time, we also then realized we can all talk about this, but we're going to need a champion, and that was key to us in terms of leadership. Okay, we initially came from, again, the business was struggling because we also had poor culture. Okay, and I'll talk to that just now. In this slide here, I have now flagged the champion, but the sidekicks were just as important. Now I'm using sidekicks here to correlate to stakeholders. Okay, we need very specific stakeholders in different departments, stakeholders that are experts in those departments, in order to build things that will talk to one another, that have those stakeholders buy-in so that they can start working with each other, right? So this is what this speaks to, and that was key for us. We had, in our engineering department, for instance, we found ourselves with some engineers that were able to code, very basic, they weren't these heavy developers. But that, in turn, we did see that some engineers had created small little apps to make some functions within their division a lot easier. And that spoke again to what we were trying to achieve with flow, and where do we want to put the push and pull in terms of our technology. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, we were not in a place where corporate culture was where it needed to be. Okay, and I can't emphasize this enough, but culture eats strategy for breakfast, and it did. People had many good ideas. We couldn't get past them because we just couldn't get acceptance across board. We found ourselves with department alienation. Okay, and I'll speak to that a little bit further down the line as well. We talked to data, for instance, in data sets, and how each person would hold on to their own information, and how that didn't help any of the process, right? And then we also understood that top-level management, you need that buy-in. You need that buy-in because somewhere you're going to have to spend money to build what you need to build to move forward. And as we scroll down to, we had change version. So change was never easy. Change is never easy, I think, even now, especially when it comes to technology and us wanting to change and, tap into different apps and do customization. So that was also one of the big facets we had to face as we started to understand what it is we wanted to achieve with this turnaround for our business. We also found ourselves in a position, even in the facility, lots of information chasing and lots of decentralized information. And then we found departments that had a lot of information, but didn't know how to use the information. And so, again, we took another step back. How do we start moving this into the future? Okay. Now, you'll probably laugh a little later when I show you where our starting point was, because there's a whole twist in that story. But we had to take that step back, and then we had to understand, well, what are our real constraints? And at that point in time, we didn't have money to spend. That wasn't an option for us. We had to get smarter with what we did have available. And a big driver for us was the business life cycle. That cash flow is key to our business. And it is key because in South Africa, we have real things like strikes. I'm sure they exist elsewhere, but these can be unprecedented at times and can last for a month or 2 months. You don't have cash available just out of the blue to go and spend on technology. So we had to keep that in mind. And we knew that we wanted to ensure a sustainable future when undertaking this digital transformation. So what we in turn decided to do is account for these constraints. And then we decided, instead of sourcing out and getting consultants in, we couldn't afford that route. We decided we would do internal customization. Again, just with that seed in engineering, we understood that some people could code. Can we do something with it? So that's where we decided to take the journey onto its next phase. At this point, where were the PMs and where's the PMO? We're physically chasing information. The PMO would set up their schedule. Everything is manual. We've got a custom product. So every product will have a different kind of bill of materials that you have to work to. And so we would have to plot many things manually, and you'd have a different resource pool structure, again, because you have your different constraints that would happen in your workshop. And so it was a very messy structure, and there was a lot of phone calls, lots of communication overhead. And I'll show you just sort of what that feeling was for us at that point in time when we started to realize, well, we know how we're going to change this. So we then ran into the next process. We started the automation process. So we chose internal customization, and we decided we would hire a developer. So at that point, we only hired one developer, could only afford one, and then we started the journey with that developer. Now, in the next few slides, what I'm going to talk to is a little bit more of the technical items that we covered and that we then established with ourselves and internally from a strategy perspective, and what became very intentional. Now, here I talk to the physical digital infrastructure, or physical or digital infrastructure. Now, physical infrastructure, I'm not referring to data centers and things like that per se. I'm specifically talking about starting to develop apps that can be used on different types of technology. So your tools needed to evolve. And that's what I will talk to as well, because we needed to do that. I'll then talk a little bit about power of VBA. Now, VBA is a communication tool. It's a code, it's a language that we use across Microsoft projects, but or Microsoft Office applications, excuse me. And that the power of VBA for us has been a game changer. I feel that sometimes a little bit overlooked, because we very quickly want to, we see very nice apps and there's new software that comes out and want to buy into that. But with that comes licensing fees. And again, we had the cash flow constraints. We still have that cash flow constraint that we must monitor very carefully. So we don't have those options available to us. So we had to get smarter. We could not afford more license against certain products, but with the developer in place now, we could take a look at internal development and how could we tap into those apps and customize them. So here on this diagram, I will show you guys, this is very high level. We obviously have more processes within this diagram that speak to the full business operation. But this is to give you an indication of how decentralized everything really was. Now, what I'm hoping to show and share with you guys through our story is that I'm sure somewhere someone's going to relate that this is me, this is us, what's going on here. And for us, the big thing as well was we had a lot of paper. Now, that might seem insignificant, like paper, everybody has paper, but to intentionally go paperless is also something that allowed us to transform our business, not only internally, but also externally. In this diagram, here I use these just representations for paper, and then in the center here, in each department, were these decentralized pieces of information. Okay, everyone had an Excel sheet somewhere with information that had some sort of data, but the data was, it had no IDs we could speak to. We couldn't use it in any form, really. So there was a massive data cleanup that also needed to take place. And then you'll see all the little people that have plotted in here. And that speaks to the physical hunting down of information at that time. When you go talk to a stakeholder, what did you do today? What did we achieve? And you're stuck in all these repetitive progress meetings and conversations and emails. And it just became a lot. And to a point where we started to realize, well, that's where we're seeing all these gaps. And that's why we can't get information live enough to make better decisions within our facility. So all these flags, we then quickly noticed, we thought again, we're going to start at one point and we're going to be comfortable with that. It's going to be easy. Then we realized we had to start across board. And what I'd like to flag with you guys here, what I spoke to just now, was this here, the steel prep division for us. This was our starting point. This was the accidental transformation for us, the start of that journey, where we were like, we want a developer, we're going to develop our own internal parts tracking app. There are parts tracking apps, absolutely. We couldn't afford them, and the ones we could afford, we could not customize to what we needed, to what was being produced from our engineering department. So, you know, it's funny because this was the start. This was the, guys, when we do this, we will fix all of our problems. And that's not really what happened. To this day, what is funny in our story is that we still haven't developed that app, because coincidentally, we can't develop that app because everything else around this app needed to be in place. And that included all the data across all the departments, so that we have something to actually have a look at that will mean something and will speak to some sort of forecasting, to some sort of a user-friendly, practical, you know, user case. So it wasn't, you know, it wasn't, we laugh about it still now, because every time we think we're about to touch that, we're still, again, 10 steps behind. We need to have a look at other coding. What I want to show you guys here is, as we started to tap into all these constraints, these bottlenecks, these frustrations, we realized, okay, we need to obviously centralize our data. That was key. So we started to centralize our data. And by doing that, we needed to code across all the departments, as I mentioned just now. And then we started to upgrade all the tools. And in our steel prep, in our manufacturing, that infrastructure all needed to be upgraded. That included network upgrading. And I've specifically and intentionally used different pics here. And that's to illustrate that we have now gone fully paperless in our workshop, for instance. And we are able to extend that out. The apps that we have developed so far, we can extend out to subcontractors as well. And that means all our guys in our shop, they have tablets. They are connecting live to pieces of information. What that also means in terms of your PMO, what we have done is that power of VBA, we have taken VBA, we have coded MSP to do what we wanted it to do for us, to push and pull information from all these data sets across these departments at the click of a button. So we've reduced all that communication overhead, and everything happens across at the click of a button. In the future, we hope that that button will be reduced and it will think for itself. What we also did, so what I want to show you guys here is, with that expansion, we talk about the power of input. Okay, so what we found here as PMs when we were hunting down our information, a lot of the inputs were not sitting with the right people. And you were having people that were, you know, subsequently reporting to other managers, and by the time you actually got the information, it was skewing what the project was actually doing. What we have done now, by coding where we needed to code and create the applications we needed to create, and having that push-pull from the PMO, is that the power of input sits with the right person. The person that is actually in charge of that task is now giving us that live information. And that's a push-pull all the time, daily, hourly if we want. What I've shown here is that we've had the advantage of now, with our own internal systems development, we've been able to scale up that subcontractors can do the same. Again, same process, same principles we are using. So we're establishing our own little program almost that will allow everyone outside our organization to work the same as what we do. So we reduce a lot of the stress and time that would take place under normal conditions. Ideally, where we want to see ourselves is we want to head to a place of predictive analytics. Okay, the plug and play PMO, it is a long road. Predictive analytics, when you get to that stage, that's the easy stage. That's, you've got everything in place. This that we're busy with now, and we're at a stage right now that we still have to, we thought we were in a good place to move to the next app, but there's a whole re-maintenance, re-upgrade, there's a whole reshaping of some of the data sets again, because our knowledge is much better now. And that integration between different stakeholders is much better now. So we hopefully head towards that predictive analytics, but know that you need to have this in place. You can't head there straight away. It is a long road, and you need to really push through, and you need that corporate culture to assist you build that, so that you can see yourself moving towards the AI environment. What I've highlighted here, I said own department. Subsequent to all of this happening, what has happened, by developing our own internal apps, we have now subsequently created apps we can license out. So we started off by not wanting to license apps, but we will then be able in the future to create a whole business out of what we have developed. And our development team will become their own developing department. Right now, we don't have that. We have developers that are still overseen by a senior engineer. But that keeps us grounded. That keeps us rooted into our own systems. And that means we have conversations and open dialogue across every single department. And every single department understands why we have to connect to each other the way we are connecting to each other. I can just talk to some final takeaways, guys. Internal customization has allowed our business to stay relevant. Okay. Now for us, again, we don't have the luxury of just more license fees and just get the coolest things out there. You know, technology has this hype cycle and we just can't afford any of that. We can't even try it. So we're on this long trajectory, but what that has helped us do is as the tech develops, our options become better. So although a long road for us, it is a better road for our context because at some stage, everything will be fully automated. We're not far away from it, but it's still a bit of a road. Our second point I have there is we have extended our capabilities beyond our own facility. And that I talked to earlier just now, where we have created that opportunity. And then the 2 points I can't emphasize enough is through early stakeholder buy-in, we've ensured the system keeps growing with reduced resistance. Now, this is key in any digital transformation journey. And I say this because you're not going to make one change. You're going to make several changes. And there's nothing worse than walking into a department and you go, look, I need to connect to some of your data sets and we want to do this with them. And we want to change this about this app. And people are very wary and they close the door in your face. So you want that buy-in early so that you can do that change later on. And they understand the value. When you've done this correctly, your stakeholders understand the value. It's measured. And that, for me, is that has played in our favor substantially. And then again, corporate culture matters more than you think on any digital journey. I can't emphasize that enough. That without that, any digital transformation is going to be one hell of a uphill. I think that's my time. Thank you, Bev. And I hope I've been able to connect with some people with this.
Thank you very, very much, Shayla. That was very, very interesting. And we're now going to go into a time of Q&A, but we're going to start off with a question for you. So I think that if we can go to the Mentimeter question that we had prepared for this, to find out what are the challenges or the impact that you have found over this pandemic time. The pandemic has certainly got us into a place where we've had to come to terms with technology, whether we like it or not. So Shayla, as you have a look at these responses, and I see that we are joined by Wikaso as well, and I will ask for your thoughts as well. As you have a look at some of these challenges, any comments that you'd like to make on them?
So virtual meetings is an interesting one because so we have a very open office, and before COVID, it was literally a walk to the next person's desk and a quick chat. And so virtual meetings became very important for us as we moved away, as COVID hit us. That was key to sort of understanding how each person will no longer walk to each other's desk and actually have to talk over technology. So establishing and understanding that same relationship, we started grooming that quite a lot. Again, through our leadership, they started then focusing on that, because what we did see from virtual meetings, for instance, for us, is that there was an added benefit heading towards a hybrid working model. So even now today, my PMs, they can work hybrid. You know, we've got our facility that the guys are here permanently, but we've got that luxury that we have built enough of a robust system that we could be anywhere in the world and we can still tap into that project live to see what's going on with it.
Wonderful, thank you. Brian, any thoughts from your side?
Yes, thanks Bev and Sheila for your presentation. I can see that you've touched almost on every aspect of the project constraints, and that's budget, time, and scope during your experience with AI. But now to a project manager, what would be your, like, from the lessons you've learned, what would be the primary lesson or primary advice you would give to project managers today as we look forward to the perverse impact of AI?
I would speak again to, I think the biggest impact we had is that understanding who is most responsible for every single task. If you put that input when you develop your systems, if you put that input at the right hands, that is going to change how you govern your project manage, or how you project manage, let's say. So my advice is you need to walk through what it is that you guys are struggling with through your process flow with the people that are responsible for tasks or apparently responsible for tasks, and bring them to the conversation and go, guys, I'm not getting what I need. What's going on? And it's there that you'll find that usually the wrong person is giving the feedback. And if you can tap into feedbacks and feedback loops and groom what it is you need from who you need, that will change the course of how you start communicating across your project as well. That's what we did. That's what helped us anyways.
Wonderful, Shayla. Thank you. I've got a question, two questions from Jenny, if you can maybe answer the first one very quickly. She says, did you outsource your change management initiatives? That was the first question. And she said, I'd be interested to hear how you manage the impact of staff on the floor. If you could maybe chat to that.
Okay, so to the first question, no, we manage all the change management is internal. The advantage we have, again, like I said, corporate culture, strong leadership. When you've got your leadership buy-in and you've got your top CEO on the same page and directors talking the same language, you're going to achieve that success internally. So that change is governed by our general manager. So he's really the champion for us, and he brings us back to what it is we need to achieve, and then we bring all of that together. So if you could just give me that second question there, Bev.
All right, so the second one is, how did you manage the impact on the staff on the floor?
So the staff on the floor, are you talking to specifically sort of our artisans or across board in general? Because again, we have such a range of different people that we work with different expertise, different levels of education. So what I'll do is I'll touch a little bit on sort of the workshop buy-in, and then I'll touch a little bit of sort of the internal office buy-in. And our workshop, again, it was a very us, them. That is something we focused on and we got rid of. It's something we do daily. There is no us, them. There is a project, and we need to deliver as a team. So in terms of the workshop staff, we had to physically show them why we wanted to change certain things. And as we did that and then got their buy-in, that their attitude towards that change started to become a positive one. When we introduced screens into our workshop, because we don't use paper anymore, they were mind blown. They were like, well, this is great. Why don't you do this earlier? I have a screen the size, a big screen to look at my drawings. This is fantastic. So they immediately start getting that buy-in. But you have to take the time. It's, again, another long road. You have to take the time, educate, and show people why this is important. If they know where you're headed together, you'll get that buy-in. It becomes a lot easier. It's a little easier in the office stuff, not for all departments, again, because some departments will be very protective over what they've got. And, every manager sometimes can be very, well, I do things my way, and this is how we've always done it. So you've got to break through those walls, and it works in the same fashion. You've got to take important stakeholders, but you've got to show that value. You've got to show that buy-in. It doesn't happen overnight. So it is something we still do now, because change is still happening right now for us. And some of it is big change, and people are scared. People don't know how the technology works. And then, they don't want you to touch their computer, but their computer is from 10 years ago. And you're like, look, I know it works, but it can work better. So we're still busy with that kind of conversation as well.
Wonderful, Shayla. Thank you. And unfortunately, we have run out of time. Brian, sorry, we're going to have to hold the question for the next one. If you can perhaps pop it in the into the Menti chat. That was absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much. We are now going to be heading into a comfort break for 10 minutes exactly. Part of my challenge doing the PMI Summit is that I have to remember that it is the role of project managers to keep things on time and on budget. Fortunately, I don't control the money, but I do control the time. So if we can be back, please, at 11:30 for a hard start on the dot. Thank you very much. Grab a cup of coffee, go to the loo, check your email, come back for the next awesome speaker. Thank you very much, everybody.